February 2014, Nippon Budokan, Tokyo. Eric Clapton had been performing in Japan since 1974, had played the Budokan specifically more times than most musicians play any single venue in their entire career, and understood as well as any Western musician has ever understood what it means to perform in that building, the specific reverence of a Japanese concert audience, the quality of silence, the particular way 14,000 people can go completely still together in a room. Eric Clapton was Mid-Layla when his voice gave out. Not the microphone, not the amplification. Eric Clapton's voice, the voice that had been singing Layla since 1970, that had performed it in stadiums and arenas and television studios and once, famously on a stool with an acoustic guitar at the Royal Albert Hall, cracked in the second verse and went silent. The guitar kept going. The band held the arrangement together. Eric Clapton looked up from the guitar and out at 14,000 people in the Nippon Budokan and raised one hand. Not a dramatic gesture, a quiet one. The gesture of someone asking for something they need. 14,000 Japanese fans sang every word of Layla in English, not a section of the audience, not the people near the front, all of them. Every lyric, every phrase, every line of the song Eric Clapton had written in a rented room in Miami in 1970, carried back to Eric Clapton in Japan in English at the exact moment his own voice could not carry it anymore. Drop a comment right now, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe. Eric Clapton stood at the Budokan microphone for the full length of the song. Eric Clapton played every note. Japan sang every word. When the last chord faded and the silence came back, Eric Clapton stood for 7 seconds without speaking. Then Eric Clapton said one sentence in Japanese that the tour manager, standing at the side of the stage, would describe afterward as the most honest thing he had ever heard said into a microphone. Eric Clapton had first come to Japan in 1974 on the tour that produced the Live in Japan album, 3 Nights at Budokan, a recording that became, over the following decades, one of the most studied documents of Eric Clapton's playing from that era. Japan had taken the music differently from other places. Not more enthusiastically necessarily. Eric Clapton had played for enormously enthusiastic audiences in America and Europe across 50 years. But differently. Japanese audiences brought to Western music a quality of attention that was difficult to describe without sounding romanticized and was genuinely unusual. They listened with the full apparatus of respect. They listened to the spaces between the notes as well as the notes themselves. They understood that the music was a transaction between the performer and the instrument and the room, and they treated their role in the room as one requiring a specific and disciplined engagement. Eric Clapton had noticed this in 1974 and had returned repeatedly. By 2014, the relationship between Eric Clapton and Japanese concert audiences had the quality of a long and mutually respectful friendship, a 40-year exchange of music and attention, and the specific kind of trust that grows between people who have been in the same room together many times under honest conditions. Layla existed because of 1970. Eric Clapton had written the song in Miami, in a rented room near the Criteria recording studio, where Derek and the Dominoes were recording their one and only album. The song had come out of an impossible situation. Eric Clapton had been in love with the wife of a close friend for years, had found no way to express it that did not damage everything around the expression, and had finally done what musicians do when the ordinary channels of communication fail. Eric Clapton had written the thing down and put it in a key of D minor and given it a melody that reached without resolving, that kept arriving at the same open question without ever finding a satisfactory answer. The song was a reaching out, the specific kind of reaching out that becomes necessary when all other means have been exhausted. By 2014, Eric Clapton had been singing Layla for 44 years. In those 44 years, the song had done things that the Miami hotel room could not have predicted. It had been played at funerals and weddings. It had been covered in dozens of versions across every genre of music. It had been heard in films and television series and advertisements. It had become, in the way that the very greatest songs become, a piece of public infrastructure, something that belonged to the culture as a whole rather than to the person who wrote it. Eric Clapton knew this. Eric Clapton had made a kind of peace with it. The song had left Eric Clapton and gone somewhere that belonged to everyone. The February 2014 Japan tour was Eric Clapton's 8th tour of Japan since 1974. The Budokan date was the second night of a four-night Tokyo run. The first night had gone without incident. The set had been strong. The crowd had been warm. The band had found the groove that a band finds on the second night of a run that took the first night to establish. The second night started with the confidence that the first night had built. Eric Clapton was 68 years old in February 2014. The voice had been showing what 50 years of use does to a voice for several years, not catastrophically, not in ways that had prevented performance or significant recording, but in ways that a musician of Eric Clapton's experience and self-awareness registered honestly and managed with professionalism. The voice was not what it had been in 1970 or in 1992 or even in 2004. This was not surprising, and it was not a crisis. It was the condition of a voice that had been in regular demanding use for a very long time. Eric Clapton managed this with the same organized care that Eric Clapton brought to every aspect of performance. Set lists built around what was vocally sustainable in the current condition of the instrument, keys transposed down where the original key was no longer comfortable, pacing across a multi-night run designed to preserve what was available rather than exhaust it. Eric Clapton was not performing beyond the capacity of the voice. The capacity of the voice on the second Budokan night was sufficient for everything except the second verse of Layla, which took the voice somewhere that the voice, on that particular evening, could not quite follow. On the second night at Budokan, the voice went in the second verse of Layla. The second verse of Layla contains the lines addressed most directly to the person the song was originally meant for. It is the verse that escalates from the opening question of the first verse into something more urgent, more exposed, less controlled. It is the verse that has cost Eric Clapton something to sing every time Eric Clapton has sung it across 44 years, because it was written from a specific place of exposure and has never quite closed over. Eric Clapton hit the first line of the second verse and the voice cracked and disappeared. What happens in the instant after a voice gives out on stage is a specific kind of suspended moment, a fraction of a second where the performer is alone with the awareness of what has just happened before the awareness has reached anyone else. Eric Clapton had that fraction of a second. Then Eric Clapton looked at the guitar and kept playing. The decision was not deliberate in the sense of having been thought through. It was the decision that 60 years of performing makes automatic. Whatever happens, the music does not stop. The guitar held the melody. The band heard what had happened. Musicians of that level hear everything and adjusted their support without losing the arrangement. 14,000 people in the Budokan heard the voice go and sat for approximately 2 seconds in the specific suspended state of an audience, absorbing unexpected information. Then Eric Clapton raised one hand. The gesture was small. Eric Clapton lifted the left hand from the guitar neck and raised it once, palm outward, in the direction of the audience. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Eric Clapton put the hand back on the guitar. The gesture meant, "I need you." Japanese concert audiences have a specific relationship to this kind of moment that is difficult to explain to people who have not been present for one. The discipline that Japanese fans bring to live music includes knowing when the moment calls for restraint and when it calls for action, and the two states are not confused with each other. A Japanese concert audience will hold its applause for a piece of music it found extraordinary until the last note has fully resolved, because the applause belongs after the music and not inside it. The same audience will respond to a performer's unplanned vulnerability with an immediacy and completeness that has no equivalent in any other concert culture Eric Clapton had experienced across 50 years. What the raised hand in that specific Budokan moment called for was action, and 14,000 people understood this and responded without hesitation. They sang. Every word of the second verse of Layla, in English, in the correct melody, at the correct tempo, at a volume that filled the Budokan without overwhelming it, 14,000 voices finding the song together with a precision that should not have been possible in a room of that size responding to an unplanned gesture. They sang the words that Eric Clapton had written in Miami in 1970 and had been trying to carry for 44 years. They carried them. Eric Clapton stood at the microphone and played. The experience of standing at a microphone while 14,000 people carry the words of a song you wrote for someone who is no longer reachable is not something that has an established description. Eric Clapton has been asked about it in several interviews since February 2014 and has given variations of the same answer each time. There are moments in a career where the music does something that you did not authorize and could not have arranged, and what happened at the Budokan that February night was the most complete example of that Eric Clapton has experienced in 50 years of performing. The audience did not sing tentatively. They did not hold back waiting to see if it was appropriate. They sang with the full confidence of people who knew every word and had been singing this song in the privacy of their own lives for years and were now finally being asked to sing it where it was needed. Japan had produced a generation of music listeners who had encountered the English language partly, sometimes primarily, through Western popular music. The lyrics of the songs they loved had been memorized before the grammar of the language was understood, carried as sound patterns that had meaning through the music rather than through translation. Many Japanese fans of Eric Clapton's generation had known the words of Layla for decades. They had sung those words in their bedrooms and in their cars and in the karaoke bars of Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto. The words were not foreign. The words were in the specific way that lyrics become intimate when they have been lived alongside for a long time, more familiar than much of what was said to them in their own language on an ordinary Tuesday. When the second verse finished and the chorus came, the chorus that has always been the release of the song, the moment where the reaching turns into something closer to acceptance, the audience did not stop. They sang the chorus with the same precision and the same full voice. They sang the bridge. They sang through the extended instrumental section. They sang everything there was to sing. Eric Clapton's tour manager, David Sinclair, 22 years with Eric Clapton, a man who had been present for extraordinary concerts in extraordinary circumstances across 2 decades, was standing at the stage right wing. David had been at Budokan on 2 previous tours. David had seen the Japanese audiences at their most attentive and their most generous. David said afterward that what he witnessed in those 4 minutes was something that the previous 22 years had not prepared him for. Not because he had not seen great concert moments, but because this one was not a great concert moment in the ordinary sense. It was not Eric Clapton doing something extraordinary. It was 14,000 people doing something ordinary, singing a song they loved at exactly the moment it was needed. The extraordinary thing was the timing and the accuracy of it. The last chord faded. 14,000 people in the Nippon Budokan stopped singing simultaneously, as though the ending of the song was a signal they had all agreed to in advance. The silence that followed was absolute, not the silence that follows a performance. The silence that follows something that cannot be immediately responded to, because any response would be smaller than what it was responding to. Eric Clapton stood at the microphone. 7 seconds. Then Eric Clapton spoke. Eric Clapton said one sentence in Japanese. The sentence, when translated into English, means, "Thank you for carrying my song." Eric Clapton had learned the sentence years before on an earlier Japanese tour, had learned it as a courtesy, a small acknowledgement of the language of the country he was performing in, a gesture of respect in the direction of the culture that had been receiving his music with such consistent generosity since 1974. Eric Clapton had said it on previous visits in smaller contexts as a closing remark. Eric Clapton had never needed to say it in the way that it was needed that February night. The sentence that had been a courtesy became, at the Budokan in 2014, the most accurate description available of what had actually happened. 14,000 people had carried a song that its author could not carry in that moment, and the song had arrived at its destination. The Budokan responded to those 7 Japanese words the way the Budokan responds when it has heard something true, with a silence of 2 seconds and then a sound that built from the floor to the ceiling in the specific way that the acoustic design of that building allows, a sound that had been described by every musician who has performed there as one of the most beautiful sounds available to a performer in any venue in the world. Eric Clapton finished the concert. The voice had returned by the next song, partially enough. The remaining 8 songs were played to an audience that had already given everything they had to give and who were giving it again. After the show, David found Eric Clapton in the dressing room 40 minutes after the last song had finished. The room was quiet. David had other things to cover, logistics, paperwork, but had come here first. "What did it feel like," David said, "when they sang?" Eric Clapton was sitting with a glass of water. Eric Clapton looked at it for a moment. "Like the song went home," Eric Clapton said. Like it was always going there and I was just the last one to know. David wrote this down in the production log, not the technical notes David was supposed to be writing. The sentence, "The Tokyo leg of the 2014 Japan tour is remembered among Japanese Eric Clapton fans as the Budokan night, not the first night at the venue or the third or the fourth, the second night of the 4-night run, the night Layla went home. Subscribe. Drop a comment. Come back next week."